Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Jordan Palmer? First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. Jordan Palmer was born in 1979 and lived in Belgrade, Montana. His residence was on the 700 block of Mantle Drive. Stephen Campbell lived at 807 Mantle Drive, just a few hundred feet to the north. Not much is known about either one of these men, except that Stephen may have had difficulty regulating his intake of alcohol. Now moving to the timeline of the incident. On August 19, 2024, at 11:28 p.m., a 911 call was placed to Gallatin County Dispatch. This is in Montana. There were no sounds of distress on the call, and it disconnected right after this. At 11:29 p.m., 1 minute later, dispatch called the number back. A man who identified himself as Jordan Palmer answered the phone. Dispatch told him they received a call from that number and asked him what was going on. Jordan said that he shot someone in front of 808 Mantle Drive in the town of Belgrade. This is the house across the street from where Stephen Campbell lived. He said, "I was just confronted and attacked by this blank dude on the blanking street." He explained that he saw a piece of mail floating down the road and went to place it back in the mailbox. A dude confronted him and told him he can't enter other people's automobiles. This dude was later identified as 44-year-old Stephen Campbell. Jordan never referred to him by his name. There is no evidence the men had ever met. Jordan denied entering automobiles. He claimed that Stephen said, "I'm giving you one blanking second, you're going to get blanked up." At this point, Stephen threw his cigarette on the ground and started swinging at Jordan. This, of course, was alarming to Jordan. He said he put a few rounds into him, and now he is laying on the ground. Dispatch asked Jordan if Stephen needed immediate medical attention. Jordan responded, "Abso-blanking-lutely." They asked him if Stephen was awake. Jordan responded, "No." They asked Jordan if Stephen was breathing. Jordan said he was, but not anymore. He then indicated that he heard some very blanking, traumatic, hard-to-blanking-do breathing. Dispatch instructed Jordan on how to perform CPR, but Jordan declined. When asked to confirm that he was not going to perform life-saving measures, Jordan changed his mind and said, "Might as well, I guess. I know what the blank you do. Something about the vertebrae, right?" He then said, "Hey, cops are on their way. Do I have to continue?" The call ended when dispatch heard officers arriving on the scene. The police found Stephen Campbell on Mantle Drive, near the mailboxes. There was a pistol on the ground near his head. He was unconscious, and he had been shot 7 times. Jordan, who was standing over Stephen's body, said, "This guy just attacked me. I blanking shot him." The police ordered Jordan to get on the pavement, and he complied. Stephen was transported to a hospital, where he was later pronounced dead. Only one firearm was found at the scene of the shooting. It belonged to Jordan. It was a Glock 19 Gen 4, chambered in 9mm Luger. A common magazine size for this weapon is 15 cartridges. The police found that there was 1 cartridge in the chamber of the weapon and 8 cartridges in the magazine. There was also an additional magazine in Jordan's pocket. When the police read Jordan his Miranda rights, he invoked his right to counsel and made no further statements. On the next day, April 20, the police received a call from a man who lived at 806 Mantle Drive. He told the police that he viewed his surveillance video and noticed it recorded the incident from the previous night. He was referring to the shooting. The police went to his home. The man gave them a copy of the video in MP4 format. Perhaps he put the video on a flash drive or something like that. The video, which has not been made available online, shows 2 men moving toward one another in the center of Mantle Drive. They were standing several feet apart. It appears as though the men were arguing. The man who appeared to be Stephen threw a lit cigarette on the ground behind him. The altercation continued, but it was not clear who was talking. Moments later, there was a flash of light, and the sound of 7 gunshots could be heard. The police believe that Jordan fired at Stephen before Stephen made any movement toward him, which contradicts the claim Jordan made on the 911 call. Jordan Palmer was arrested and charged with deliberate homicide. His trial started on July 30, 2025. On August 7 of that year, Jordan Palmer was found not guilty of deliberate homicide. As Jordan was walking out of the courtroom, a free man, he told a reporter he was going to get pizza. Now moving to my analysis. Jordan Palmer maintains his innocence, and he was found not guilty. The state, of course, is not pleased with the verdict. They believe the evidence supported the deliberate homicide charge. This brings me to the question, was Jordan guilty of murder? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that he was guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. The only weapon that Stephen had on his person at the time of the shooting was a small folding knife. It was clipped on his pocket. Jordan never mentioned a knife in the 911 call, which supports the theory that Stephen never used it or attempted to use it. The police claim that the surveillance video showed Jordan opening fire prior to Stephen moving toward him. Based on the content of the 911 call, Jordan did not seem to show a lot of compassion towards Stephen. Initially, he refused to perform CPR. Even after he agreed, he seemed eager to discontinue the activity. Now moving to the exculpatory factors. On the night of the shooting, Stephen had been arguing with a former girlfriend. She indicated that the relationship had just been placed on pause, and Stephen's feelings for her were stronger than her feelings for him. In the hours leading up to the shooting, Stephen was sending messages to his former girlfriend, but she was not responding. The last message he sent was, "See how it feels to be used and not loved." This makes it seem like Stephen was very upset. Perhaps he was so upset he would be willing to start a fight with a random stranger in the street. When Stephen was taken to the hospital, his BAC was tested. It was a staggering .301. This level is extremely high, well into life-threatening territory. For comparison, .08 is the legal limit for driving in many jurisdictions. Somebody with a BAC of .301 is likely experiencing a major loss of motor control, confusion, a high risk of vomiting, and a high risk of respiratory failure. This is considered an emergency, which necessitates medical treatment. This level is consistent with making impulsive choices, which could possibly include attacking a random man on the street at night. In addition to being intoxicated on alcohol, Stephen had recently consumed clonazepam, ketamine, and a generic version of Zymbalta. The surveillance video is not clear and is open to multiple interpretations, but everyone agrees that Stephen threw a cigarette on the ground behind him. Some people may view this as a sign of aggression, like he was getting rid of the cigarette to use his hand for something else, perhaps a punching-related activity. The defense argued that the video showed Jordan backing away as Stephen was moving toward him. This makes Stephen seem like the aggressor. After the shooting, Jordan called 911 and stated that he had been attacked by a man in the street. He could have easily just walked or run away from the scene, but he made no effort to get away. Jordan didn't seem happy about it, but he eventually demonstrated a willingness to perform CPR on Stephen. When the police arrived, Jordan was cooperative, and he repeated his claim that he acted in self-defense. Jordan and Stephen had never met. What motive could Jordan have possibly possessed for killing Stephen other than Stephen provoking a confrontation? This supports the theory that whatever happened, Stephen initiated it. Jordan's ex-wife suggested that he was a kind man and had a calm demeanor. The investigation into the shooting was very poorly managed. The detective assigned to the case did not keep the knife that was found in Stephen's pocket, believing that it had no evidentiary value. So this was a case where the shooter said he acted in self-defense, but the person who was shot possessing a knife wasn't important. Not keeping the knife is an incredibly unwise move. After speaking to Stephen's former girlfriend, the detective did not ask to see her phone because he did not think it would be relevant. The police had taken photographs of bullet holes in a neighbor's house, but lost those photographs during data migration. The most significant mistake made by the detective was the way he collected the surveillance video. The video had been subjected to a compression algorithm when it was converted to MP4. The metadata was lost, and the process of compression changed the video. An expert for the defense explained how the algorithm eliminates frames that are just a little bit different than the original frame. For example, the police know that Jordan fired his weapon 7 times, but the video only shows 1 muzzle flash. It is possible that Stephen did swing his fists at Jordan, but the compressed video did not retain those frames. Also, frames could have been lost which contained Jordan retreating from the scene. The bottom line is that the deleted frames could have contained evidence that supported or contradicted Jordan's account, but now there is no way to know. Due to the way the video was collected, it can never be authenticated. This presents a real problem when trying to use it as evidence to prosecute someone. The detective made it clear that he was not aware of the hazards of using a copy of the video. Essentially, this was an admission of incompetence. When considering all the evidence in this case, do I believe that Jordan Palmer was guilty of murder? In my opinion, the jury made the right decision. Jordan was not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. As far as his guilt in reality, there's just no way to know. That's the real problem with this case. There's not enough evidence to push it definitively in one direction or the other. This is a case of subtlety, where the smallest piece of evidence carries great significance. There were two key elements that helped Jordan. Stephen was intoxicated and upset, and he threw a cigarette on the ground. These factors worked against Stephen enough to tip the scale in favor of Jordan. Ruling out aggression on Stephen's part would have been the key to convicting Jordan, but Stephen was his own worst enemy. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. I believe that Stephen provoked the confrontation with Jordan, probably because he was heavily intoxicated and upset about the breakdown of his romantic relationship. He was looking for trouble, believing he had nothing to lose. That doesn't mean that I believe this was a perfect case of self-defense. It's possible that Jordan reacted too quickly to a threat that he could have avoided. Was Stephen in any position to be effective in hand-to-hand combat, considering his level of intoxication? The state indicated that all 7 shots were fired by Jordan in just under 1.5 seconds. The shooting involved more rounds and was much quicker than I would have expected. Sometimes when a person is too efficient at using a firearm, one can get the impression that they wanted to use it. Furthermore, the choice of weapon can make someone appear guilty. There's a substantial difference between a man who carries something like a Smith & Wesson J-frame in his pocket loaded with 5 .38 Special Plus B cartridges and a man who carries a Glock 19 loaded with 15 9mm cartridges along with a spare magazine, presumably holding another 15. Both strategies can be justified. Weapon selection is a personal choice. However, the latter gives this impression of being a little too prepared for a confrontation. Was Jordan the type of person who was eager to demonstrate his skill with a pistol, and Stephen gave him just enough of a reason to let loose? I don't know the answer to that question, but it's something worth considering in this case. Now moving to my final thoughts. When prosecuting an alleged killer, the burden of proof is on the state, just like any other criminal charge. The case of Jordan Palmer introduces an interesting thought experiment about how overcoming the burden can be problematic. Imagine 2 men walking on the street, one armed and one unarmed. They are strangers. There's no history between them, no obvious motive for one of them to harm the other. One man shoots the other to death and claims self-defense. There is no usable video, no witnesses, no clear evidence of aggression on the part of the shooter, no way to contest the few details offered by the shooter. Should the killer be convicted of murder? There is no doubt that if certain variables were modified in this scenario, the shooter would find himself in trouble. For example, if the other person was a 4th grader, a 90-year-old retiree, a 100-pound woman who was not athletic, or a man with a physical disability, which would make fighting impossible. In those instances, the shooter would probably be convicted of murder. However, if the person who was killed was a man who appeared to be capable of causing physical harm without using a weapon, it's not as clear. This is kind of like that old question: if a tree falls in the woods and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? If a man falls on the street and no one is around to see it, is it murder? In this case, the view was blurred, obscured by lost photographs, missing frames, and other missteps that left the truth just out of reach. Those are my thoughts on the case of Jordan Palmer. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. When people prepare for a self-defense scenario, there is a paradox that emerges. The better prepared they are, the more guilty they look if something does happen. So if there's like a burglary in some house in a rural area, and the homeowner shoots the burglar with like an AR-15, maybe he shoots him like 20 times or something, that may be legal, like the burglar was intruding and the homeowner had the right to use lethal force. But the optics of it don't really look favorable for the homeowner. I think this principle is more dramatic in public. Somebody has a stronger right to self-defense in their home than they do when they're walking in the street, at least arguably. So if a person is carrying a weapon with a relatively large capacity magazine, they have a spare magazine, maybe they have a few, they go to the range often in practice, it just seems like they're a little too ready for something to happen. And this could lead a jury to believe that they were looking for something to happen. If a person is carrying a very small pistol, one that's clearly designed for concealed carry, they don't have much experience with it, they don't own 100 other weapons in their house, this just looks like a person who was thinking, okay, it'd be nice to have a weapon for self-defense. I don't want it to be cumbersome, so I'll carry this small weapon and hope that if something terrible happens, I can resolve the situation with just a few rounds. Again, I think that weapon choice is personal, and there's nothing inherently wrong with a person being very well prepared. But one must think about how a jury will see it. A long time ago, I covered a case where a guy used a 10mm auto, which is a very powerful cartridge, to shoot a man 3 times, killing him. They were in a rural area. The shooter was initially convicted, and then later he was released. Like, the conviction was overturned, and then not long after that he died from an illness. And I think this case has really stayed in the minds of anyone who carries a concealed weapon. Like, if you're using a powerful weapon or you seem too prepared, that can really be perceived negatively. It's kind of strange because usually we think of being prepared as something good. Somebody could be financially prepared, somebody could be well prepared for a vacation, somebody could be well prepared for weathering a storm. But if somebody's well prepared for self-defense, it can really work against them dramatically.